Hello everybody, welcome back to May in Motorsports. I'm Jake, and I hope you guys all had a great Christmas, a great Hanukkah, and I also hope you guys have a great New Year. Let's get into it. So today I want to talk about the Cup Series Superspeedway package. Because personally, I think it could use some tweaks. Super speedways are obviously notoriously known to be the great equalizer races. The draft keeps everything close. All the drivers are bunched up in big packs. The crashes are massive, cars getting airborne. And everyone goes into these races, no matter how good or bad your car is, realistically, anybody can have a chance of winning, which is a great thing. However, I feel like with the Cup Series, right now, the package is too unpredictable in terms of the drivers do not have enough control over their own destiny. Before I talk about things I do not like about the modern day super speedway package, I want to talk about some things that I do like. The unpredictability. It will always come down to the checkered flag. Nobody has a stranglehold on the field. It's not like the winner is determined 30 laps before because you can't pass the leader. There's also a lack of an air bubble. The early Gen 6 days had this huge air bubble. If you got to run on somebody trying to pass them for the lead, that big bubble of air between the two cars would just push that guy in the front further away. It would be incredibly hard to pass the leader. With this next gen car, it's not really an issue. And I appreciate that because it always keeps things close. And one more thing I want to point out is the choo-choo train doesn't really exist anymore. The only time you see the cars choo-choo train along the top lane is by design. In past cars like the Gen 4, the COT, the Gen 6, the top line would naturally form just because the way the package worked. You couldn't make a move from that top lane. If you made a move to the bottom and no one went with you, you're going to the back of the pack. It always comes down to the wire. They're fun races, but there are a lot of issues at play, and the biggest issue in my eyes is the drivers do not have any control over their own destiny. This mostly is going to relate to Daytona and Talladega. Obviously, we have Atlanta Motor Speedway, Echo Park Speedway, but Atlanta's a whole different animal, and I'm going to talk about that track later because the racing is substantially different at Atlanta compared to Daytona and Talladega. The first issue I want to talk about, all of this fuel saving. Daytona and Talladega usually has a required pit stop in each of the three stages, in which drivers, due to track position meaning so much now and not being able to make moves on your own, they bank on that one pit stop per stage to get their track position. So you'll see drivers for a majority of the race go 50, 60, 70% just trying to save gas, which I understand. That's the only way, though, you can efficiently pass is when you're taking advantage of people not going 100% just to get to that first pit stop. Because if you burn more gas, you're going to have to put a bit more gas on the pit stop. And when everything cycles around, you'll likely be towards the back of the pack. And once people start going 100%, it's incredibly hard to make a move. We see 3 wide, 4 wide when they're fuel saving, and it's good eye candy. But when you know they're not going 100%, they're just saving fuel, it kind of takes away that intensity. If they were going 100%, they can make 3-4 lanes work. That'd be something completely different, but that's not the case. They're fuel saving. And it's just all a result of people being able to make a 3rd or 4th lane work just because the other 2 lanes are not going 100%. And once they do go 100%, one of the biggest issues is the 2x2 gridlock. I mentioned before how we don't really get too much like top lane training anymore. We don't. However, the 2x2 gridlock's not much better. When they're going 100%, due to, I believe it's a lack of power in these cars and too much drag, when you try to make a move on your own, it just stalls out. The power of the bottom and middle lane is so strong. Can you stop texting me, bro? Due to just a lack of power and too much drag, you're not really able to make a move. You have to be up somebody's butt the entire time to make some sort of speed. We do see a 3rd lane naturally develop sometimes. Daytona this year, I'm thinking of Blaney when he came from 17th to 1st in 3 laps in the top lane. However, that only happened because the entire middle lane ditched Ryan Preece so the Hendrick cars could help Alex Bowman make the playoffs. That was all like a circumstantial. If there was no playoff talk, they would have probably stayed in line trying to benefit themselves, not taking that risk. Again, the excessive fuel savings an issue. Once they do go 100%, they're stuck going 2x2. Gridlock, they can't make a move. They have to just push each other. I think it's a result of not enough horsepower and too much drag. We see these guys qualify barely at 180. The Xfinity Series cars qualify faster. And to me, if the Premier Series of stock car racing has slower cars than basically AAA baseball level of stock car racing, I'm not too much of a fan of that. It's too reliant on the locking bumpers and the slam drafting. You have to be up somebody's butt to make speed. You have to be up there. You got to be pushing them. There's no air bubble now. You can't manipulate the air. You got to just push the guy in front of you and hope it works. A lot of these wrecks these days, it's not because of a handling issue, a misjudgment. It's really just hard, over-aggressive pushing because that's the only way you can make your lane move. Another thing I want to talk about is the handling. I think with these wider tires and a lack of power, the cars are relatively glued to the racetrack. You never see anybody self-spin at Daytona and Talladega. There's no handling. They're so secure. And again, when they're getting intense going 3 wide, they're mostly not going 100%. They're secure. When they're 4 wide at Talladega in stage 1, they're secure. They're going 80%. They could push the cars harder, but they're not. Another point I want to make. Side drafting does not really have an effect anymore. You can point back to the COT era, the Gen 4, especially the early days of the Gen 6. Side drafting was such a quintessential point of racing. Super speedway racing. You had to know how to side draft. That's why guys like Dale Jr. and Brad Keselowski were really good, getting right up to that rear corner panel, slingshotting away. The reason why the side draft worked is because there was always a bit of an air bubble. The cars are a bit more spaced out, so you can side draft somebody without getting side drafted yourself. The issue with that, though, is since you have to be 2x2 gridlocked, you have to be up each other's butt. You can't really side draft somebody, because if you side draft somebody, that just reduces the time the car behind him or that driver gets to that guy's bumper. So it might help you for a split second if you're the car side drafting, but once that car behind the car you're side drafting gets that push, they're going to be slinging forward. You're the one who's going to be hurt by side drafting. It's all about trying to keep guys not locked together for as long as possible, but the side draft makes that happen quicker. The side draft really has the smallest amount of effect that it's ever had. Any race in the next gen car. I want to bring a point up that I didn't mention before, that this year at Daytona in the summer race, Logano actually got loose on his own and spun out a self-spin. I like seeing that. I don't know if the track is starting to get a bit older. I have no idea, but I like seeing handling come into play. Daytona handling does kind of come into play. You can get a third lane naturally. Cars will bottom out a little bit. I think it's because of the tighter radius in the turns, but Talladega really gets hurt by it. Because Talladega, the wider radius in the corners, is one of the reasons why it's hard to make a third lane go, because the power of the 2 gridlocked lanes is so strong. You can only really make a move if a majority of the field goes with you. Since it's all about gridlocking and the runs come so big, you can never get somebody squirrely by side drafting them. You can never get somebody out of a rhythm. If you try to pass somebody on your own, it's just going to slow that car down. The run comes so big behind, they get locked together, and before you know it, they're just training on by you. There's so much grip in these cars now that it's really, really hard to make any moves by yourself. If handling had more of a factor in these races, and the cars would lose handling over a run, good cars would prevail. Bad cars would not. I want to see that more often. Tires, I feel don't mean much. The wider tire and just the lack of power. Eric Jones a few years ago, I think about at Talladega, went the whole race without changing left side tires. The crashes don't happen from a lack of handling anymore. I want it to be that drivers are fighting these cars. They're so secure, and the only reason they crash is all circumstantial because of how hard they have to push. It's forcing them to get messy. Gen 6 era, we had cars spin out by themselves. The COT aero mattered. These cars are just so glued to the ground now, it's very hard to do that. And yes, it does make it entertaining. It keeps the packs even tighter. But knowing it's not as hard to drive the cars at super speedways is the problem. I want to go back to Atlanta real quick. I mentioned how before Atlanta is completely different than Daytona and Talladega. Atlanta is the best super speedway in NASCAR we got right now. It has shades of old before the repave Daytona and Talladega, with handling coming into play, tires really meaning something. Good handling cars prevail, bad handling cars struggle. Cars get loose by themselves. They're fighting the wheel. They have to actually push the car as hard as they can without losing control. There's not nearly as much fuel saving. I've seen people in Atlanta be able to rip the top and make moves by themselves. We saw it at Atlanta this year in the fall race, like summer race rather. A smaller pack really prevailed. People were taking turns every lap. The leader has somewhat of control over the rest of the field. However, he's not unstoppable. And we saw Keselowski, Elliott, and Bowman all kind of like trade the lead off. And you could hold the lead and do a good job, but you were never fully safe. At Daytona and Talladega today, you're always a sitting duck. You can get past whenever second, third, fourth place chooses to. It's just the whole field will have to go with you. And if you make that move, the runs come so big, you're sacrificing so much speed and time by pulling out a line because the drag will just suck your car back. How many times in the modern day do we see at Daytona and Talladega the race always comes down to the checkered flag? I mentioned that before. It's a great thing. But it's like they gridlock 2x2, and then the very, very, very last like corner of last lap, second place will back off just a little bit. First place gets like a 2-car length lead. Not even that big of a lead. They suck back up to him in like 3 seconds. Saw Michael McDowell, this happened to him. Keselowski was like, that race, for example, the 2024 Dega race, when they were gridlocked 2x2 the last like 25 laps. McDowell had a stranglehold on the field. But that's because everybody else was content riding in line. The second Brad went for the win, he didn't even really have that big of a run. It just kept carrying and carrying and carrying. McDowell put the desperate block on. Because you have to always have somebody behind you to have any speed. You can't really carry a run with these cars. He gets turned. And I love the closeness. I love how it always comes down to the wire. But I wish drivers had more control. And the only time you really can see if a car's good or a car's bad at a super speedway is when the field is not going 100%. Joey Logano this year in the Daytona 500 like dominated, uncontested in stage 1. That's because it's early in the race and drivers were backing off, allowing him to lead. They could have passed him at any time. I don't know if I'd rather have drivers go 100% and not be able to make a move, or drivers going 50%, being able to make a move whenever they want. I don't know. Because at least like when you get the single file train in the Gen 6, at least when you have a car dominate the last 40 laps, at least you know everybody else is still going 100%. And you have to fight every single lap to maintain your position. The DEI cars from 2001 to 2004 were dominant. You had to take every run you got because you never know when your next big run would come. You can get the runs whenever. They're being given out like candy. The runs come so fast and they don't take any skill to generate. You had to actually plan your run. You had to actually take anything you got. You never knew the next time you would get a run big enough to pass the leader. That's what I miss most. I wish drivers had more control. I'd rather them go 100% the entire race, even if it's not the best race ever, even if the leader has a stranglehold in the field, than have the drivers be able to pass the leader whenever and choose not to. And the second they try to towards the end, a big block happens. It needs to have there needs to be a level of skill added back into modern superspeedway racing. I'll give you some examples. The DEI cars again from 2001 and 2004. If they got shuffled back, they had good enough cars and just knew what they were doing to maneuver their way, make runs on their own, dominate the races. Sure, once they got to the front, it was hard to pass them, but seeing natural passes throughout the field rather than just some gridlock is better than that. I think of Dale Jr. in the early 2010s with the Gen 6 car. He was able to drive his way through the field on multiple occasions on his own, just perfecting the side draft, manipulating the air. Once he got the lead, knew how to block the lanes. That all requires some level of skill and knowledge, and the spotter has to go to work. Today, you can be 2 car lengths ahead of your lane, leading the bottom, leading the top, and the runs come incredibly fast. And drivers now have to just stay in their lane. They can't make an attempt to block because there's no air bubble. The guy behind is just going to run right through him. If you make a late block, there's no security anymore. You can't manipulate the air. You don't really have any tools in the box. What I would personally change, the problem is too, these cars are pretty prone to the air. I would easily say add some more power, reduce some drag. But these cars are already hitting really incredible speeds when they are locked together trying hard. I think Zane Smith hit 203 at Talladega, which is crazy. But add a bit more power, maybe. Reducing drag would help. I'm not really sure. I just want it to be more in the driver's hands. One of the most beloved super speedway packages, probably the best ever, was when they started using a tapered spacer back in 2019 to 2021, the last few years of the Gen 6. Those had the biggest spoilers ever. The drag was crazy. The difference was those cars were generating so much more power. The extra power and the smaller tire they used to run, handling came into play. Cars were bottoming out left and right. You had to actually fight the wheel. You can get big runs, but having a good handling car mattered. And there was enough power so that if you made a move by yourself, you can gain some spots because your run would be able to carry out. I think the cars today run about 450 horsepower. I think the cars in 2019 ran about 550. And yeah, they started lowering the horsepower because the cars were going a little too fast. We all remember Ryan Newman's crash. But it adds a level of skill when the cars are not fully secure and you're able to make moves on your own. It's more circumstantial now than ever. I still think the product's good. I'm going to Daytona this year. Daytona is the biggest race of the year, and it's a super speedway race. And I'm not going to lie, I'm always entertained regardless of what the package is. But I want there to be a level of skill added back to super speedway racing in the Cup Series. Maybe we need a bigger air bubble between the cars so the runs don't come as fast. The car's handling, not as good. Do something with the tires, maybe. Make it so that the side draft has some sort of purpose. And something about getting rid of the fuel saving too, because I'm not a fan of that whatsoever. We shall see. As of right now, there has been no announcements of changing the package. I don't think they will. It's definitely not the worst super speedway package ever. I think it's fun. I just want to see it get better. And I think the drivers would prefer it to be more skill-based. The teams would. We just have to wait and see. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching this video. Again, I'm Jake, Mayan Motorsports. What changes would you personally make to the Cup Series Super Speedway package? Let me know. Peace.